So I saw this debate last night between Marc Lamont and Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks. And I said, I have to talk about this conversation because it's very apparent to me what Cenk Uygur is trying to do. He is trying to do something that he criticized other commentators for doing along the way. Now, Cenk Uygur has made it very public, so has Anna Kasparian, that they have decided to try to work alongside with MAGA. And I think I'm going to get into what I think they are trying to do, but it's not working out for them right now. TYT has currently lost, according to Social Blade, 30,000 subscribers. So it's obvious that their base, or some of their base, is not really feeling this pivot. They're not feeling this move that TYT is trying to make. Now, during this discussion here with Marc Lamont, there was something that Cenk Uygur brought up that obviously gave me pause. And I want to get into that discussion, and I want to get into why what he said is problematic and why it does not work out in the long run. Let's go ahead and take a look at this, buddy. Get some popcorn for you because this is a doozy. Let's go ahead and dive in right about here.
You're holding on to a point that I'm not making. You keep debating the argument about whether or not we should call them white supremacists. Let me stipulate again. I'm not making the case about whether or not we should call them white supremacists. We don't have to engage that part.
You're calling them internally white supremacists and saying, why are you going into a room with white supremacists?
That's the second straw man. My debate isn't whether or not we go in the room. It's how we go in the room, what rooms we go in, and what we do and what we say about the people in that room when we're in the room.
Okay, great. Let's have that conversation.
Right. So you went on stage with Charlie Kirk, for example, who, just to use your description of him, says, not white. We're not going to use the white supremacist language because for the purpose of this conversation, it's not that helpful. But certainly he consistently advocates positions that certainly strengthen white supremacy. He certainly advocates positions that strengthen anti-Black racism. He certainly advocates positions that advance Islamophobia, that push against women's reproductive rights, just based on the things that he has said and done. Would you agree with everything I just said?
Largely.
Okay,
let's go ahead and pause there. That's a good moment to chime in. So it's really interesting to me. I seem to remember it was just over a year ago where Cenk Uygur had a debate with Brianna Joy Gray about doing exactly what he's doing right now. Now, Brianna wasn't saying that we need to work alongside MAGA, but she was having conversations with people that were beginning to embrace some parts of what we call right populism. And Cenk Uygur basically screamed her head off. I'll never forget that conversation. And I think what's important that Mark mentioned there is that he said he's not basically opposed to having those conversations with people that are MAGA. What he takes criticism with is when you have those conversations with them and you don't push back on the areas that there needs to be pushback. Because the reality is, if you go into those spaces and you are nicer towards them, I mean, Cenk Uygur was more harsh towards Brianna Joy Gray, who is on the left, than he was towards Charlie Kirk. So that's where this conversation is coming from. Cenk Uygur was at Turning Point USA event, conference, whatever you want to call it. And he was having a dialogue with Charlie Kirk. So there's video of this on TYT as well, if you are interested. And what a lot of people noticed is that Cenk was soft towards Charlie Kirk. He was meaner towards Brianna Joy Gray, who was on the left, than he was towards Charlie Kirk. And I think that is what is sending alarm bells for some people. So the point that Mark is trying to make is that if you are in the room with those individuals, there are certain duties that you have as someone who is progressive that you are supposed to push back on. So obviously you are not going to align with some of the racist, rhetoric that Charlie Kirk has said. You're not going to align with that. You're not going to align with the abortion rhetoric. There's certain things you're just not going to align with. So it's not that you can't have the conversation. It's that when you do have the conversation, that you make sure that you hold Charlie Kirk accountable. And this is something that I've noticed. There's a number of, whether you want to call them progressives or leftists, et cetera, that when they are invited into these spaces, they are not holding MAGA accountable when they have those conversations on those issues that they hold so dear on the left. And when you do that, number one, that allows you to be reinvited back onto those shows. There's a reason why you don't see me in those spaces. There's a reason why you don't see some of us that, consider ourselves to be left. I'm to the left of Cenk Uygur, by the way. A lot of times people, if you're newer, you're just joining this and you may think, oh, well, she didn't like Kamala. Nope. And I didn't vote for Kamala. I didn't vote for Trump. I voted for Jill Stein. So the two-party system to me is very problematic. But that being said, there's a reason why you don't see me there. There's a reason why you don't see, other people. Even Marc Lamont Hill has not been invited in some of those spaces. There's a reason why, because if you're going to go there and you're going to just criticize, what the Democratic Party is doing, they're going to continue to invite you back. But if you go there and you don't criticize and you criticize, what is happening with the Republican Party as well, then you're less likely to be invited back to those spaces. That's just a reality. I saw the exchange between Cenk Uygur and Charlie Kirk. And yes, he was a lot nicer towards him than he's been towards some of us to his left. So that's the case that Marc Lamont Hill is trying to make there. Let's go back in.
So you're on a stage with someone like that.
Yeah.
Can you see at least how you being on a stage like that could make someone who trusts you because of all the great work you've done believe that he's not so bad? And maybe the positions he's taking are legitimate ones. Could you at least see how being in the room with him without offering any substantive critique of him in that space could be problematic?
But wait a minute, I defended left-wing positions, so I don't accept your premise.
I said a substantive critique of his behavior, what he's doing. I didn't say you didn't have a critique of it, right.
I disagreed with him on trans housing. So again, I don't accept the premise. But
okay, so let me restate it because I don't want to operate disingenuously. Can you see how it could be problematic for someone? Or let me say it differently. Could you see the problem? Can you see any potential problems in standing on a stage with someone who has such positions that are so antithetical, not just to yours, but to the interests of the most vulnerable people in this country? Could you see how you might actually legitimize him in a way that's dangerous to our side, not to the country, but to the people who are confused, to the people in the middle, to the people who are still trying to figure it out, or to the people on the left who are vulnerable, who are susceptible to a switch?
Yeah. So what you have to do is you have to hold them accountable. And from what I saw from the video footage, Cenk Uygur did not do that. He did not hold Charlie Kirk accountable. And I think if he were going to, he probably wouldn't have been invited in the first place. So here's the thing. Mark and I did not agree on finding a reason for people to vote for Kamala Harris. Like he said, he could understand people wanting to do it for harm reduction. I could not make the case for Kamala Harris. I couldn't make the case for Donald Trump. I just could not make the case. But both of us ended up voting for Dr. Jill Stein in the end anyway. So there are some areas where we agree and there are some areas where we disagree. But I think when it comes to policy, Mark and I do agree a lot more. I mean, he's a member of the Green Party. I'm not a member of any party, but we do agree a lot more when it comes to policy. And I think that what's interesting here, this is Mark in his element. Like he's a great debater and I would never take that away from him. He's really good at that. And I think that Cenk, I don't know what he expected this conversation to be, but it was very obvious here that Mark really revealed something about Cenk Uygur last night. And I think that it's a long discussion. When you have time, please go watch the full interview. We're not going to cover the entire interview. But I think what it shows is that even some that supported progressivism, it shows that they were willing to put the issues of the marginalized to the side in order to get some type of a win with the right. And what do I mean by that? The progressive movement has not had real wins on the national level. Now, there have been wins locally through the states. I mean, there have been states across the country that have passed $15 minimum wage, paid leave, paid, sick leave, et cetera. There have been progressive wins across the states, even in some of the red states. But on the national level as a movement, we did not get there. Bernie Sanders ran twice in a row, did not become the nominee twice in a row. And we can get into that another time, get into all the details about that. But the reality is it seems like if you were a commentator that was a part of the Bernie Sanders movement, which I was not at that time, you're kind of in this position now where it's like, okay, what do we do? Do we continue on with a progressive movement when the Democratic Party keeps blocking our every move? Do we just condemn the two-party system altogether and walk away from both sides and push towards a third-party movement? Or do we try to work along with the side that just won, which is Donald Trump and MAGA? Donald Trump won the popular vote and the Electoral College. This is different from 2016. So things are different this time around because the majority of voters did vote for Donald Trump. That sends a strong message to commentators and also to the Democratic Party. What I think is Cenk is trying to do, there's two things here. Number one, yes, I do think that he's trying to, blend the TYT audience where you will get some of the MAGA viewers along with what's left of the progressive movement and, of course, liberals as well. So I do think he is trying to grow his brand. Some people call it a grift, et cetera. I mean, TYT has been known to go with what is popular. So I think that's part of it. But the other part of it is, it kind of feels like Cenk and Anna are trying to get a win for populism on the national level that has not been accomplished when Joe Biden was in office. It was not accomplished, obviously, when Trump was in office in 2016. And it seems like they're trying to say, well, they agree with us on certain issues about the establishment. So maybe we can work together on those issues. Maybe we can work together on some of the anti-war positions as well and get some of these establishment hacks, out of Congress, et cetera. And I understand that part. I think that what Cenk is trying to do is trying to meet people where they are. But even when you meet people where they are, there are still red lines that you are going to have as an individual, as a movement. And I think it is important that you do hold them accountable. A number of you have reached out to me and you've said, bring Candace Owens on the show. And I've told you, I don't even have her contact info. That's been a big thing. But the other thing is, even if she were to come on here, I am going to hold her accountable for some of the things that she has said. It's not just going to be, oh, we agree on Israel, yay, that's it. No, you have to hold people accountable. And I think that's very important. You guys have seen me do that multiple times in interviews on the show. But I think that it seems like, to me, it is very obvious that reforming the Democratic Party is not going to work. Now, I've said this for the past 3 years, but I think that TYT is now realizing we have to move in a different direction because you can only drag people along with this movement for so long before people start to get some type of fatigue and there's demoralization to go along with that. So I don't think it's just let's work with different people to get wins. That's part of it. But I also think that, yes, this is another step to continue to grow the brand. Let's continue, folks. Aye.
So there's two parts to that question. So on the one part, can I see it? Yes. I can see why people think that. And I'll end up on top of it, Mark, that not only are they worried, hey, is this legitimizing him? You're in the room with a person like this, etc. But we've also seen a pattern, right? We've seen Dave Rubin and we've seen Tulsi Gabbard and we've seen others. And first they go in the room, then they agree with a little bit, and then they agree with everything. And then all of a sudden they're all right-wingers. And then while still pretending to be left-wing and saying, oh, well, me as a liberal or a progressive or a left-winger is telling you you're right about all the issues, right? And so I get that's why people are concerned. So that's not crazy. I get it, right? But then the second half of what you're saying, I don't agree with at all. Right. So does that legitimize? Well, first of all, they won the election. So they won the popular vote. They won all the swing states. Like, we have it in our mind that
I specifically said not to the entire country, but to the people on our side, specifically in anticipation of you saying they're already legitimate and won the popular election. Again, yeah. I'm not saying that you're.
Am I legitimizing them to our side?
But see, he's doing what they've always done. Like, this is what I'm saying before. If we go back to Bernie 16, we go back to Bernie 2020. What did Cenk just say to you? He said that they won the popular vote. So he is doing what is popular at this point in time. Bernie 16, perfect example. Bernie was popular in 2016, even more popular in 2020. But obviously, the DNC cheated Bernie Sanders at the Democratic National Convention and gave delegates to Hillary Clinton in states that Bernie won, like handsomely won. So what happened after that? TYT told you to support Hillary Clinton because she was the one that got the nomination. They said, oh, the polls show that she's going to demolish Donald Trump. She was popular and she won the popular vote. So they were willing to put aside that, hold the Democratic Party accountable and those progressive policies to beat Donald Trump. So let's go along with Hillary Clinton so that you don't get Trump. 2020, similar path, again, on the Bernie train. And some of them at TYT were supporting Elizabeth Warren as well. But when it came down to Bernie and Biden, like, obviously they're like, yeah, we got to support the progressive in the race, when Bernie once again did not receive the Dem nomination and Joe Biden got that nomination. What did they say? You got to support Biden because you got to defeat Donald Trump. So that was another time where they went along with what was popular, because Biden, like, after winning South Carolina, he went through and he did pretty well Super Tuesday. And I knew it was pretty much probably over for Bernie at that point. So it was obvious that the response was, okay, the voters are showing that they want Biden and not Bernie Sanders. So what did they do when Biden became the nominee? Let's put this to the side and let's just go along with the establishment candidate and try to push them left. So this has been a recurring theme with TYT. There were many of us who were like, no, we're not going to go along with either of this. But in the end, they always ended up going with the popular position. It's just that this time around, the popular position was Donald Trump because he won the popular vote. So this is why people are freaking out, because they're like, what are you guys doing? But this is what they've always done. They've always gone along with the popular position. Now, there is something that does need to be discussed, because TYT is known as the home of progressives. And the reason why I think a lot of people are freaking out is because TYT is the landing pad. It is the home base for progressivism. It has been that way for years. And if they are now willing to embrace MAGA, that means that the largest network that has given progressives the space and the platform is no longer going to be just siding along with progressivism. They are now going to side along with MAGA as well. So what that means is that could be officially a concrete end of what has been the progressive movement. There is no other channel on YouTube that has as many subscribers as TYT does, that has been known as like this home of progressives, that is embracing progressivism. Yes, there are other large platforms, but none of them have the audience and the reach that TYT does. You have to remember, they are not just on YouTube. They are also on Roku, right? So they are on multiple different outlets there. They're also, TYT has a cable channel, like depending on what package you have. So there's that as well. So now that home base is going to decide to work alongside with MAGA. That basically puts the nail in the coffin for whatever was left of the progressive movement. And that is why some people are starting to freak out. A lot of these progressive channels got their start at TYT, whether they were working at TYT as an individual or they were an affiliate of that channel. You can point to a lot of them: Dave Pakman, Humanist Report, Kyle Kulinski. Like, a lot of them started there and then, kind of did their own thing. Kyle actually had his own channel, but also was working alongside as an affiliate with TYT. So now there is no large home base for progressivism. And that's why some people, in my opinion, I think, are freaking out. Something to think about, folks. This is wild, but Marc Lamont Hill really cooked him here.
What I'm saying is there are people who are going to vote for them, right? There are people, majority of whom are in this country are going to vote for, say, Donald Trump, right? But if you stand on stage with Donald Trump, that strengthens Donald Trump's position. It doesn't undermine it.
No, it totally depends. So, for example, I interviewed
Do you think you strengthen Charlie Kirk's position? Let's not be hypothetical. Do you think you strengthened Charlie Kirk's position by standing next to him? Do you think you had no effect, or do you think you hurt his position?
Well, first of all, I didn't go there to hurt or help his position.
That's not your intention is irrelevant. I'm asking about the consequence of your choice, not the intention of your choice.
I don't think it had anything. I don't think it helped him 1%. Not at all.
Do you think
I think this idea that if you stand next to them, that helps them is absurd. Totally, utterly absurd. Because on that logic, that's it. We never stand next to them. We never talk to them. And we're so
no. Again,
we never talk to them. Oh, we didn't legitimize them. We didn't help them. That's nonsense.
Let me ask a broader question. Do you think you advance right-wing interests by going there? Do you think you undermine right-wing interests by going there?
Well, first of all, it's not binary, but I helped left-wing interests. Definitely. Okay?
How so? Tell me how.
So every time they say yes to cutting the Pentagon, every time they say yes to paid family leave, every time they say yes to conflict of interest rules, et cetera, that I could go on, that are all left-wing positions. Does that mean it's going to happen overnight? Of course not. Does that mean that it's immediately going to go to their leader and they're going to introduce it next week? Of course not. But is it helping for them to think, well, paid family leave, that does sound pretty good. Hey, cutting the Pentagon, that makes sense. I bet there is a lot of waste and abuse. That helps left-wing positions. The good news is they're no longer left-wing positions. The right wing agrees. Their voters agree with those positions. Take the win. Take yes for an answer. Instead, the other ideology is white supremacists. I'm never talking to them. That'll show them. That won't help them at all. If I talk to them, it'll help them. Really? Because they won the election without any of our help. None of us talked to them, and they won anyway.
So this is the part where I kind of get where Cenk Uygur is coming from about this. He's like, listen, some of them do agree with us on these said issues. I understand where he's coming from about that. But I will say here that I think that Cenk may be giving more cred than what is due, because the reality is you can agree on the issues, but the moment that Donald Trump decides not to do those, not to fulfill those policies, they're still going to support Donald Trump, right? So just like people did with Joe Biden, right? So my approach to this is to leave the two-party system altogether. This is why I don't support either party, because I do see that at the end of the day, regardless of the policies that you are supporting at that point in time, if the said politician decides not to go forward with those policies that you supported, for the most part, at the end of the day, the people are going to agree with the political party that they're aligning with. And this is why I push back against the two-party system, because we're talking about TYT. This is the same network that said we reject the politicians that take billionaire money. Now, to be fair, they didn't want to reject Kamala Harris because she was taking billionaire money. They didn't reject Hillary Clinton because she was taking billionaire money when Bernie was not the nominee. So they're doing what they've always done. It's just that now they're doing this with the Republican Party and not the Democratic Party. So I don't know why more people are surprised. Like, that's the part that kind of gets me, because I just see it as though they're focused on like growing their brand. And I do think, to be fair to Cenk, I do think they're trying to get a win. I do think they're trying to get a win on the national level. But the point that Marc Lamont Hill is bringing up, at the expense of who? At the expense of which people, which groups of people, like what issues have to be pushed to the side so that you can get that win on those one or two policies. And this is the part that we really got to drive home when we get to the next clip here. The part that Cenk brought up that I think gave a lot of people pause was the part about white supremacy. He said, don't call people white supremacists, right? So that really like set Marc Lamont Hill off. And one of the things that I have to say is I think what Cenk may have been trying to say is to meet people where they are, and that if you come in the room automatically calling them names, they're not going to be willing to work with you. I understand that. At the same time, when you say don't call people white supremacists, what ends up happening, and I know this from personal experience, so walk with me here. What ends up happening is that you end up putting those issues that may impact you directly, that may impact Marc Lamont Hill directly, you end up putting those issues to the side for the coalition of one or two policies that you agree with them on. This happens in organizing spaces too, by the way. This isn't just a political thing. And so for the people who are impacted, for the people who are marginalized, putting those issues to the side is not a win for them. And where will you be when those issues that directly affect them are an issue or are front and center at the time? A lot of people like to bring up Fred Hampton. A lot of people like to say, well, Fred Hampton worked with racists. No, he didn't. Even Fred Hampton, when he met with the Young Patriots, he told them that they could not bring the racist views with them. Now, everybody didn't agree to that. There were people at that time that left the Young Patriots. There were people at that time that left the Black Panthers. There were Black Panther members who didn't agree with this alignment with the Young Patriots. So just FYI. But even Fred Hampton, who was focusing a lot on the working class, on the poor, was not going to sit by and allow the racist behavior and feelings of the Young Patriots to just be a non-issue. He said you have to put it aside. And here's the reason why. Because class and race do intersect. And I keep hearing a lot of people say, just focus on class, just talk about class. No, you can't do that. Marginalized people can't do that. I'll give you a recent example. When it comes to Gaza, if you just focus on the class people, which is the fact that the Palestinian people are occupied, obviously there are a lower class. When you compare them to the Israelis, they're occupied. They don't control the resources, the land, the air, the sea. That's the class perspective. But if you ignore the racial part of this, then you dismiss the fact that Israel was trying to ethnically cleanse the land. So class and race intersect. When we talk about Black people here in the United States, the majority of Black Americans are working class. So when people say we need a working class agenda, that includes the majority of Black people. And there are certain issues that Black people have to deal with that as a white person, you will never have to deal with, ever. Marc Lamont Hill, he's really strong on this issue. So the conversation that he's having here with Cenk is that, are you going to be willing to just put that to the side so that you can get these 1 or 2 wins? And how will that impact and affect the marginalized people that are choosing to go along with this? And we always have to ask that question at the end of the day. Let's bring this part in here.
Right. And you were an abolitionist and you walked in the room to a room of slaveholders and said, every citizen should get a house. Every citizen should have the right to vote. Every person should be safe in this country. We should all agree on that. And y'all clap and walk out and hug it out and leave, right? You could say, look at this. I just brought together the abolitionist and the slaveholder. The problem is they're agreeing that all people should be safe and all citizens should vote, but they don't believe that Black people are citizens or humans. So they think they're agreeing with you because they don't accept that stipulation, right?
Well, Mark,
and what I'm saying, and just let me finish the thought. And so what I'm saying is, when you have that exchange with them, you have a duty to confront them on that misconception. And you can't say, well, I've said it in Bible study, I've said it on the streets, I've said it in the underground railroad. No, when we're having that conversation, we have to say that thing. And then if I confront you on that, you can't say, well, Mark, I can't confront all their philosophical and epistemological. No, I'm not asking you to do that. I'm saying on this issue that you brought up, you have a duty to show them how they're wrong, because that's what's high stakes. That's what decides who lives or dies. That's what makes the political conversion. Otherwise, and this is the last piece of it, 5 seconds. Otherwise, the slaveholder walks away saying, look, me and the abolitionists agree. Let's go back to business as usual. They actually feel strengthened in their position. Now, please don't say, Mark, why are you comparing this to slavery? Please don't get on. No. Actually hear the heart and the substance of my argument and be intellectually honest and address. Don't talk around it. Address the specific example I gave you, and please answer it.
Yeah.
So Cenk Uygur right now, he's saying the same thing that he criticized Russell Brand and Jimmy Dore for, saying, let's focus on the class issues, the areas where we agree. There was the conversation between Jimmy Dore and Cornel West about a year ago, where this conversation also came up, where he said, we can't just focus on, don't talk about white supremacy, like that type of stuff. And I think I said it back then too. I think what Jimmy was trying to do was saying, meet people where they are. But at the same time, you cannot just put these issues that are critical to marginalized people, in particular Black people, to the side just so that you can get that 1 or 2 wins. So you don't even know if it's going to happen, but you can get that 1 or 2 wins. You can't do that, because what that means to Black people and to other marginalized people is that you can't bring your full self to the table. That means that you have to put aside some of the issues that do matter to you and do impact your life. You have to put those things to the side to go along with let's say the anti-war coalition. And I say this as someone who had personal experience with this. At one point I believed, and this was my mistake, at one point I believed that, oh yeah, we could just focus on, let's just worry about class and just focus on that. And then I learned that myself, along with certain activist coalitions, I wasn't organizing with like MAGA or whatever. This wasn't a political thing, but along with some of the activism spaces, what I noticed is that it didn't work. It wasn't working. And the reason being is because we can't just put aside these issues that do affect us directly. And what I also learned is that they didn't want to hear about those issues. They didn't want to hear about it. Like, that's the thing. It is never fair when one side can bring their full self to the table and they can talk about all these issues, but you can't bring your full self to the table and talk about all the issues that affect you. That's not an equal exchange. That's not an equal coalition. And I made that mistake. And it was a lesson that I learned. It was a lesson that I learned, and I learned the hard way. And this is not a new thing to discuss racial issues. I've been discussing race on this channel since the very first year it started, which was 2021. So I've always talked about those issues. And so I think that when people say this, just put that to the side, they're saying put a part of you to the side. They're saying put a part of that. And that doesn't mean every conversation you have with someone has got to be race, 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 race. No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that you should never have to hide the issues or be silent about the issues that do affect you because of that, because of like the racial issues, in order to make this coalition work. Now, I say that, and people will say, well, the Democratic Party says that. No, when we look at the two-party system, the reality is the Democratic Party, the Republican Party doesn't want to deal with those issues. The Democratic Party, don't be fooled, they don't want to deal with the issues either. They'll talk about the issues, though. They'll virtue signal to you about the issues, but they never fix them. So both of those parties, when we're talking about what impacts people in this country when it comes to their race, both of those parties fail on that issue. It's just that the Democratic Party, they virtue signal about it more because that's a big part of their base. They can't win without the black vote. You just saw that this past election. So don't get it twisted. Don't think that the Democrats are out there fixing these racial. They're not. They're not. That's why they continue to lose support among the black voters. But the reality is that what Cenk has to understand is you can't put that part of you to the side. This is something that I think we need to discuss about what happened with that Bernie movement, because there was a similar message there where just focus on class, don't talk about the racial issues. And this is something I think that we really need to dive into. Let's play a little bit more here, and then I'm going to tell you where I think this all comes from.
No, I get the analogy completely. I totally get it. So look, there's two parts to this. Number one, you just built a straw man. You said, I did it in Bible study. I did it at a grocery store. No, I did it in right-wing spaces. I did it on some of the largest right-wing.
Yeah, that would be, that's not a straw man. To be clear, in 1800s, Bible study was a right-wing space. Only the right was allowed in the grocery store because black people were property. It's a perfect analogy. It's not a straw man. It's a perfect analogy.
You acknowledge I've done it in right-wing spaces, just not in that.
Just not the one that has us on the news right now. This is the big one.
But
this
I
is
don't
the one
know
to do
if it's going to make the news. Like half the time I think it's going to make news and it doesn't. Half the time I don't think it's going to make any news.
Let's not get distracted. Please, I'll allow you to continue. I don't want to cut you off again. Please continue.
Okay, so then the second part of it is, Mark, in the problem with your analogy is that in the slaveholder part of it, the fact that they hold slaves is so central to that conversation. So you can't possibly think like, I just said all citizens should have an house, and I assume that they think that means slaves, or I assume that they think that doesn't mean slaves. Slavery is the central part of that conversation. Are they citizens or are they not citizens? Whereas now when we are talking about establishment, mainstream media, there's a lot of different variables there, and a lot of different things that people can mean. So whether we're talking about Fox or OAN within that conversation is not necessarily central in the same way that slavery is central in your analogy, right?
What's central in this conversation?
So what's central in this conversation is, do they actually believe some of these populist opinions, right? Do they actually dislike establishment politicians because they take donor money and hence are corrupt? And that's super central. And yes, My assessment is that MAGA voters, and yes, they're not seeing clear on Trump. They're not seeing clear on Elon Musk, but they do hate the corruption, and they do hate the donor class. Okay?
To that point, they clapped you when you said establishment media. They clapped when you said we hate Dick Cheney and Mitch McConnell. When you said we got to get rid of the donor class, no one clapped.
I noticed that. You know why, Mark? Because I challenged them by talking about their donors, and I've done that on many shows. And I've talked about, hey, remember Elon's a donor. I've talked about Miriam Adelson being a donor. When I get to Miriam Adelson, we go back to agreement, okay? And you might not expect that from the right wing, who supported Israel throughout my entire life. But now when we talk about Israel with the right wing, half of them go, yeah, no, you're right. I don't know why we're, and they're not doing it out of the charity of their heart. They're not doing it because they love Muslim lives so much. They're doing it because they don't want, in their way of thinking, they don't want to waste money on there. Why are we giving it to Israel when we should be having it here at home? But I'll take it. But I never would have gotten there if I never talked to them. I never would have realized how much they've got concern about funding Israel if I hadn't talked to them. So these are the things that we discover when we go to have these conversations.
And I don't think Mark is saying not to talk to them. I don't think any of us know, like in our spaces, in our personal spaces, I don't think any of us can sit here and say that everybody that I know is a Democrat. Like, I don't think, especially if you live in a red state, but I don't think any of us can say that. I don't think, again, I don't think Mark is upset about having the conversation with them. I think it is, what do you say when you're in that room when it comes to accountability? I think that's the part that he's trying to drive home. I think, again, watch the full debate. I think Mark did a great job here. But the point that I want to land with is this, because I'm already over 30 minutes. I told myself I keep it under 30. The point that I want to land with is this. This goes back to the one criticism that I did have from the Bernie Sanders movement. You cannot separate race and class. Class and race intersect. As I told you before, Black people, the majority of us are a part of the working class. So keep that in mind. 2, I think one of the issues with the Bernie movement was this idea of, let's not, push forward with the racial issues. Let's just focus on class and universal policies. Now, I agree with the universal policies. I still do to this day. But the one criticism that I will add about that movement is that even when you look at those universal policies, what you will see is that even if we distributed all of that to everybody, Black people are still at the bottom. This is something I talked about a couple of months ago. So there's a difference between equality and equity. And if I say I'm going to give everybody $15 minimum wage, I'm going to give everybody, maybe that's not a good example, but I'm going to give everybody healthcare. Great. We all have healthcare. Great. But does that fix the racism in the healthcare industry that Black people experience? Does that fix the racism in the healthcare industry that Black women experience during maternity? No, it doesn't. If I say I'm going to give everybody $1,000 a month UBI, okay, great. Does that mean that no one's at the bottom? No, Black people are still at the bottom. By the year 2050, Black wealth will be 0. That's the prediction. You guys think I'm joking? I'm not. Every other group is above us when we talk about wealth, because we don't have generational wealth. And that goes back to reparations. So that was one thing. And Bree and I talked about this when she was on the show last time, that Bernie Sanders refused to have a Black agenda, refused to have reparations plan, even though he was pushed to do so by Nina Turner and Cornel West as well. He refused to do that, but he had no problem supporting reparation policies that helped his people. So the thing is this. I think part of this comes from that idea of the Bernie movement, where just focus on the universal policies and focus on class and leave the race part out of it. Now, this is not to say that Bernie Sanders didn't call like Trump like racist and things like that, but calling someone racist is different from having a plan that is going to help those marginalized groups that directly impacts them. Jill Stein had a Black agenda platform. She directly addressed Cancer Alley. Bernie did not have that. She directly addressed the indigenous population in this country and the issues that they have. She had a plan for them that directly impacted them. When you dismiss that part of the conversation, there are certain things that directly impact certain groups in this country that will not only, they're not addressed, but they're also not resolved. They're not part of the conversation. So Bernie not being willing to do that made it not a part of the conversation. So when Cenk Uygur comes in and he says that don't call people white supremacists, part of that comes from that idea of let's not focus on those issues, just focus on the universal policies, which again does not equal equity. That's not equity. And that's one of the criticisms that I did have. And I supported Bernie Sanders, but like I told you, I look back on that and I understand why some people said, no, there's no black agenda, not doing it. You saw people do that this time around with Kamala Harris. So the question that we need to start asking ourselves is, as well, when it comes to policy, if Cenk Uygur is willing to work alongside MAGA on the areas where they agree, the question that people need to start asking Cenk Uygur is, why is it that Cenk Uygur is not willing to work along with people to his left on the policies where they agree? Those of us to the left of Cenk Uygur agree with him on most of the policies that he supports. MAGA doesn't. So why is it okay for Cenk Uygur to work with MAGA on the 1, 2, maybe 3 issues where they agree, but not work with people to his left where they don't, where we do agree on most of the policies? Those of us in the organizing spaces, the marches for Medicare for All, TYT, was nowhere to be found. Not saying they had to be on the ground, but they wouldn't let the organizers come on and promote it either. Why is that? Why is it that we're talking about, whether it's socialists, Marxists, etc., why is it that he is willing to work with MAGA when they agree on fewer policies with him, but he's not willing to work with people to his left that agree with more policies? And that's the question I want people to ask Cenk Uygur. If you're watching this show and you have an interview coming up with him, ask him that question, because I think that is going to be a very revealing moment. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.